have such sights to show you.
We're Poppin the Scary horror podcast here. I'm your host, Coale, and with me as always, I have my good friend and co-host, Aaron.
Woo! I run into the room with my arms up.
Yeah, we can't afford to have a live audience.
Yeah, it's got to simulate it. Just imagine, it's a little theater of the mind.
You know, you gotta set the scene
You got
for
a couch,
it. There,
you know. There's me. There's Coale. I'm running in.
And
Ellen
Andy
is
Richter.
there. Oh yeah. Sure.
Yeah.
Andy Richter's probably a better choice. If it was Ellen, she'd be berating us behind the scenes.
Oh yeah, absolute.
Yeah, Andy Richter, yeah.
No, Andy, we needed Andy Richter in our lives, not an Ellen. So if y'all have Ellens in your lives, get them out and replace them with Andy Richter, por favor.
What the Ellen are you doing with Ellen? You know what I'm saying? It's Richter with Richter, you know what I'm saying? Woo!
Oh man.
So, what are we talking about today?
Yeah, you betcha. I will get this boy back on track. So today's film we're watching today is A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, Freddy's Revenge, which I am in particular going to try to address it correctly for the most part, because I finished, whenever I went through the Hellraiser 2 episode, apparently I butchered the title multiple times.
Oh.
And it's actually called Hellbound Hellraiser 2.
Oh, Hell's 2, Bound to Hell, raising canes.
But it's just so funny that, like, with a lot of these, like, sequels, sometimes they're, like, just straight. Like, Friday the 13th, it's, like, Part 2.
Part 2.
And then other times they'll have, like, A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, Freddy's Revenge. I always found, like, fascinating.
Okay.
In terms of, like, naming a sequel, do you think, like, a numerical addition is sufficient enough? Or do you feel like they have to add, like, a little flair?
I prefer the Fast and Furious method, where it's just fucking jumbled. Who knows what it's going to be next time, you know?
No,
10 Fast, 3 Furious, the squeakquel, you know? Like, what? I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of their sequel naming stuff, but that's a whole different tangent here. But as for a sequel to Nightmare on Elm Street, it was released 1985, and I watched a documentary more about the first film, but with the success of the first film, it basically launched New Line Cinema to being an actual distributor. Oh. And so what was their method after the first one's success? Pump out more sequels. That was their whole goal there.
Don't stop the money printer.
But I imagine probably have not heard a lot of people talk about Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2 by any means. And that was the same with me. Like, I would see compilations of, like, the films, like, mashed together of, like, the coolest parts or anything. But aside from that, I mean, I couldn't tell which part came from which whenever I first saw, like, initial montages of it. But I never really heard anything about it. The only films I ever heard talked about in the franchise was 1 and 3. Those were the only two. As for Part 2, I never really heard anybody talk about it, not really, like, wavering one side over the other. And so whenever I watched the film, it was an interesting whenever I watched the film, it was a very interesting experience, because I'm going in being like, okay, what happened in between 1 and 3, which I hear so much about? And do you have any expectations, thoughts, since you were a fairly big fan of the first one?
I like the first one. I think that ending was really fucking dumb of the first one.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm interested to see what that means. Are we going to see any of the same characters, or if it's going to be new people and Freddy, or what?
Well, and I will be able to point out the ending that Wes Craven also hated the ending.
Oh, good.
This was a part of the distributor, the one that was, like, kind of marketing everything, because he wanted that sequel bait. He wanted the potential of Freddy to come back in some form, because they did, like, multiple endings, which spoiler alert for people who haven't seen the first film, which, if you're listening to this episode, I appreciate the support, but I'm also kind of confused, but that's beside the point. It was initially supposed to end with the teens riding together, and then it just pans on the girls doing jump rope. Nothing else. Just like that's a boom, straight in, happy ending, kind of bow on top there. But obviously they just had big plans for churning out sequels after sequels. So it'll be I'm very curious, because I'll talk more about the history of this film whenever we dive more into the details, but I'll be very curious if you're able to pick up on some elements of the film that were later heavily discussed and has now become more prominent to the public eye than it was back in 1985.
Okay.
Yeah, so we are going to head on back down to Elm Street as we check out A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, Freddy's Revenge.
Whoa.
He's mad.
You've got the body. I've got the brain.
And now we have returned from A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, Freddy's Revenge.
Oh, glad we woke up from that nightmare. Am I right?
Oh, Dad comes on. So,
I enjoyed it.
You know, well, that's good to hear. It's funny because watching throughout the film, this is probably, out of all the films we've ever watched, the one you've laughed the most through.
You think so? I don't know.
I don't know, because, like, I mean, what would even be a close second? I mean, it's not like you were rip-roaring at every moment, but there's definitely a lot of giggle moments.
Bro, there was a few we laughed quite a bit at. I laughed a lot at Halloween.
That is true. There's definitely some laughable moments in Halloween.
Some really funny dialogue in there that wasn't supposed to be funny. I think the same with like Friday the 13th, the first one. There were some funny moments that, yeah. This one was just, yeah. I laughed a good amount though.
Yeah, which is definitely good, because I could tell you the first time I watched this, I did not laugh.
I mean, I ain't laughing.
I ain't laughing at this. Yeah, it was definitely a jarring experience the first time I watched this, because it goes in such a direction that I was not anticipating.
Really?
Compared to the first one, considering the boundaries that were set.
Yeah.
There, like, I feel like how the film starts, it feels natural as a sequel, but whenever you start to discover more about the secrets and everything.
Yeah, this one definitely sets up a different set of rules than the first one did for how Freddy kills. Yeah.
No, so I think because of that, it just kind of made it a jarring experience. Not to mention, there are multiple moments of, what in the world am I watching right now?
Yeah, there's definitely there's definitely a few of those where it's like, oh, okay, we're doing this now, all right.
Yeah, and just to kind of get an idea for people who have not seen the second Nightmare on Elm Street film, it basically focuses on a boy named Jesse who's been having these terrible nightmares since he moved in to the residence that Nancy once lived at whenever she was on Elm Street, which she is not in this film whatsoever.
Nope. She's mentioned, but she's not a part of it, yeah.
And so Jesse is just trying to figure out what is with all these nightmares he's having, and as he starts to uncover more and more secrets, there's loads and loads of more secrets that are even revealed to the audience whenever it comes to Freddy Krueger and the power he has in this film.
Yeah.
Like I mentioned, story-wise, I feel like the beginning, like, the pieces are set up appropriately.
Yeah.
But the twist and turns it takes, I was definitely not prepared for.
I don't know. I feel, honestly, for me, like, plot-wise, it seemed pretty predictable. But as far as, like, how we got to those plot points,
that's what I'm talking
it
about.
was
Like,
definitely
I feel
weird.
like if you mentioned the bullet points, it would look like a structured story. But it's like having connect the dots, and you have a line, and you go the longest out of the way. And then go back to connecting it.
Because I feel like when you really, really zoom out and you just talk about, like, the important, like, here's, if you had to summarize the plot in 30 seconds, you know, from start to finish, like, it's a really basic plot. But yeah, like, yeah, the devices they use, the scenes that they structure that plot around here, yeah, there's a few. The pool party scene in particular is just like, what the fuck is going on?
Dude, at the, man, like, it had lost me earlier in the film.
Yeah.
The first time I watched it, because I'm like, I don't even know what's going on anymore. But the second time, even knowing the punches, the secrets, the turns, it was still disorienting. By the time I got to the pool scene, that I'm like, okay, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, it's just one of those things that it's like, okay, you made it further because you kind of know the hits are coming and stuff, but then just get to a point you're like, okay, I have to call Uncle.
I was with it, and I think until the pool scene, I was like, okay, sure. It wasn't like I was like loving every minute of what it was feeding me, but like I was with it until about then, and then I was just like, right, you're slipping.
Yeah, for sure. And again, like I want people to know, like if it comes to like the story, like just the idea of how they're starting the sequel, I think it's perfectly fine. I feel like it's a totally reasonable following of events there, you know, especially since you know they weren't able to get a lot of the main cast except Robert Englund as Freddy, which even then he initially turned down the role because he didn't get as much money as he requested. And so the studio's execs are like, oh fine, we don't need him, and they're like, oh yeah, we need him. And so they relented and ended up paying him what he wanted. And for not having the main cast and introducing a new cast of characters, I feel it does it in a believable manner. I definitely believe how the film could start with a new cast of characters and everything going on. The problem I have is whenever it comes to the story is the fact that the rules they established in the first film kind of go to the wayside in the second film as more powers are introduced. That makes it a fairly disorienting experience and kind of frankly confusing one a bit. Like it's like you get it, but it's like, but why? Like
I kind of I honestly think, at least in the first half of the movie, that the way they showed that you were in a dream or not in a dream kind of sequence was like pretty fair. You know, I was like, that's fine. I know when we're in one. There was one part in particular. I'm not gonna spoil, but I'll just say who it's with, and you'll get it. Like the shower scene / gay club part or whatever. Yeah, that's the one where I was like, okay, I thought that was a dream because it was so wacky that I thought it was a dream.
Bizarre.
But then by the end of it, you're like, oh, that must have not been a dream, and that's where it starts getting a little too blurred for me. Yeah,
and I guess like I think we probably just have to talk about the powers a little bit. Sure. You know, not so much spoilers, but in the first film, Freddy only has the powers in dreams, which makes sense because in dreams, like, insane things happen that can never happen. Right. And so it makes sense. It's his domain. He could manipulate it. He could do everything. But in this film, it's revealed that he's still having the same powers, but just in reality because reasons. He just all of a sudden can do this.
Whatever reason, he has to like possess the body of the main character in order to enter reality. So like the main character falls asleep, he enters the body, and then he's like sleepwalking as Freddy Krueger, I guess.
Yeah, which, you know, I think that's a fine concept whenever it comes to, like, sleepwalking, because, you know, it's, like, an actual thing. Makes sense. The thing that just starts to get disorienting is there's so many moments in a film you think, oh, is the character asleep? And you're like, well, wait, that doesn't make sense, because it clearly shows them, like, being awake the next moment, or everyone's awake, experiencing the same thing. And so that's where, for me, it kind of loses me a little bit there. I think it's perfectly fine to build up on the character, but it just, I guess, happens because he's able to possess somebody, therefore he manipulates reality.
Right. And it's weird because the film starts with the original rules, kind of like when they're on the bus and everything, and it's just like, oh, that was just a dream, you know. Yeah. Like he's just having a dream about Freddy Krueger. He didn't actually do that, and he was seeing Freddy in the dream, you know. But it's not really until later that the film sort of unveils the plot point that Freddy's like, you want to kill people, you are me, or whatever. Yeah. I'm gonna use you. And that's definitely where it starts to like things start in dreams and then you don't really know, and it turns into reality, and then it's just like, okay, well, everybody's witnessing this and remembering it, so it must be reality, and it gets weird.
Yeah, it's weird, and honestly, that was like one of the biggest issues I had while watching this film the first time. And watching it the second time, it's like I accept it a little bit more, but it's still like, because I feel like there's no good explanation as to why he could suddenly do this and didn't try to do it in the first film, which obviously from a filmmaking standpoint, it's just, again, they just had this idea and they stuck to it, but in a sequel, it's like, oh, but what if?
Right. And I don't mind that aspect as much as I mind that I don't think there's a closed loop within the film itself. I don't feel like there's a reasonable explanation even within whatever fantastical sphere. They're just like, yeah, he does this in this scene and this in this scene, but there's no explanation as to why the rules are different from day to day in the movie. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. And, it's like in horror, you can suspend your disbelief in a matter of speaking sometimes, but whenever, again, you mentioned this, they laid down clear ground rules on how Freddy operates, and then whenever they're like, nope, it's not doesn't work anymore, and for no good reason, it just kind of makes me go like, okay, I don't know what to think about this here. But yeah, and I know we've talked a little bit about the characters there, so why don't we continue talking about it in particular?
Yeah.
Jesse. Let's talk about our boy Jesse. So I feel like as a main protagonist, he's fine. I feel
he's fine.
Yeah, I don't feel like he's like awful to where I can't stand him, but at the same point, he's not quite as gripping of a protagonist as say Nancy is. And even then, Nancy, I feel like it's very hard after coming from the first film and having a likable protagonist as Nancy and jumping to Jesse, who again isn't terrible, but there's nothing defining about him. It's pretty much just okay. I do find it a very interesting aspect in the fact that he's a much more vulnerable protagonist as a man. It's not like he's like ultra Chad or anything like that. Right. He's very insecure about himself and his struggles and everything else.
And in the first scene where he's introduced, I mean, it's revealed pretty quickly that it's a dream, but you can see that he's like, he's dreaming about himself, and his fear is that he's not liked. There's like these two girls in the front that are like making fun of him, and he's in the back of the bus, and he's like, I'm just an awkward kid.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how he's introduced. But like, he's like, it seems like a reasonably well liked, just kind of awkward, normal high school kid, which was cool to see as a protagonist. But... yeah,
definitely so. And it is funny, especially with him being offset by his friend Grady.
Yeah.
Later on, which is like,
who is the
absolute
Chad?
The Chad, the jock, everything, just kind of like the big meathead sort of person. And I do feel like they're dynamic as friends, I guess, which is another weird thing on it's how
like enemies to friends arc.
Yeah, it's sort of a weird thing, but again, I do feel like it does add a good layer of chemistry whenever it comes to the characters. It just, again, it's not a thing where I'm like, oh, this is so gripping. I love this, connection there. Because, like I said, I feel like Nancy and Glenn from the first movie, I felt like they had a little bit, like, more realistic chemistry there as opposed to just these two a little bit. But, again, it's hard to, especially whenever you start comparing the first film to the second one, it's hard not to just compare and see which ones you like better than the others. But as is, I feel like Jesse and Grady as a whole are perfectly fine. Like I said, Grady's just the big lughead, and just serves as a very interesting dynamic that will play to like the themes of the movie that a lot of people have picked up, which we could talk about later on. But overall, again, whenever it comes to Grady, I feel like it's fine. And then there's the friend that's actually the girlfriend, Lisa.
Yeah, the love interest.
Yeah, that was also an interesting one, again, to where, like, I didn't even know they were really an actual, like, item together. Because at first they kind of make it seem like they're just friends.
I think they, meet in, the pretty... They don't know each other for very long, right? Because Because in the very first scene where you see Lisa, he's like, I gotta go pick up Lisa or whatever. And the dad's like, who's Lisa?
Yeah.
So, like, when they start, they're just like, they don't know each other that well, I don't think. But they're like, you know, they're kind of flirting. And then by the end, or somewhere in the middle, really, they're hardcore dating. But
Yeah, for sure. And I definitely feel like that's definitely the case there. And so again, I feel like with her role coming in, just kind of help discovering the backstory to Freddy Krueger.
yeah.
I feel like it's fine. I never disliked her really. She didn't really do anything. It's just again just very okay.
I thought she and Grady were a couple of the better actors in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, the guy who played Jesse, he did good, with the exception of like there was a few times where he needs to be like dramatic and monologue that were like that were really funny bad.
Yeah, it's
but you know, those are tough.
yeah. There's definitely some very weird deliveries that, and just
Stop the
weird
bus!
stuff. Oh.
You're going too fast.
Oh my gosh!
And there's like a Joker monologue he has with Grady, where you gotta wake me up, pal.
To be fair, I feel like again, Grady serves as a perfect foil for that scene there.
He's just
He's
like, what the fuck, bro? What are you doing?
So I definitely think that's pretty well done overall. Whenever it comes to other characters, there are like other characters, but again, it's like this is like going to be kind of like lightning round sort of stuff there.
Yeah.
Because there's Jesse's parents, who I feel like they're perfectly fine. I believe that they would be his parents.
Yeah, I think they did a good job as
Yeah, and I do gotta give
dad.
Yeah, such being a big hard ass. It's so funny. And just his explanation for things that are very unexplainable there.
Right.
He just manages to find something.
Put a firecracker in that bird, didn't you?
Yeah, it's just a gas.
Just get a little gas, that's all.
Yeah. It's just, and you know, again, just served as interesting stuff. And then I guess the other notable character to mention is Coach Schneider.
Coach Schneider!
Just the gum chewing coach who is
all right, dirtballs.
yeah, pretty much typical gym coach. There, also being a hard ass, which again I felt like he was a fine addition. It was just a very like, okay, this is weird how involved he is.
Yeah, he was kind of a major player in the beginning there. Yeah, in the film, I think it was mostly to push Grady and Jesse to be friends. But
I think that's fair. I think it's definitely fair that he was used as a device just to kind of increase their friendship, because Grady and Jesse had quite the first interaction with one another.
When they were... Wait, I can't remember their very first interaction.
Well, the first interaction, he got hit with a baseball, and then they had the...
And then he tears his pants
You're out.
off.
Yeah, he rips his pants off.
Shows his ass. I will... See, this is a good time to talk about one thing I enjoyed about this movie, is I think there was a lot more male sexualization than there was female sexualization, which is refreshing to see in a horror movie from the 80s.
Well, you are very perceptive, because that is...
very gay.
Yeah, and that is actually done intentionally. As it came to find out, the director came out, he's like, oh yeah, no, we were definitely trying to push the agenda, which even in 1985, you know, talking about homosexuality was not commonplace really at that time.
Yeah, there is exactly one scene where I feel like they ham-fisted a little, and it's when they go to the gay bar.
Oh my god!
And Coach Schneider's there.
Yeah, it's
and then he gets tied up and whipped.
Yeah, it's such a weird, like, and that's the thing. Like, I feel like on the one hand, I respect it having that sort of context. Which again, going into the second film, I had no idea about the social context of this movie, and it was very jarring to me, and I was like, well, that's weird. And then I listened to her like, oh yeah, that was intentional. It's like, okay, that makes sense.
Of course it was intentional.
Yeah, so like I said, things tend to go over my head a bit. I'm just like, maybe I'm just imagining things. But yeah, it was definitely very interesting to see that aspect, but that's the reason why it's kind of gained a cult following.
I actually really liked that scene if it was made clear that was all encapsulated in a dream, but it seems like it was like actual reality, and I don't know when that became reality, because if the whole thing was reality, then I don't like it. But if the whole thing was a dream, then it makes so much more sense that that's how he perceives Schneider.
Well, and that's a weird thing, because random things will happen and you think, oh, well, that's a dream.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, no, it actually happened. And then the characters make decisions that, you know, you feel like you would make it a dream, but then, no, it's reality. It's just so bizarre, the decisions that they make. Right. Which, again, I mean, it's definitely kudos to them. I can't say I've ever seen a film quite like this too much in my lifetime. But at the other point, it's just so disorienting and jarring and just like, what am I watching at some points? So it's definitely kind of a not so good time there. And speaking of like contexts, we might as well talk about the main antagonist of the film, Freddy Krueger. Because they actually talk about, you know, how Jesse's being possessed by Freddy later on. That there's
Frederick.
Yeah, and so
they never call him Freddy in this movie. They really didn't call him Freddy much in the last movie either. Fredward's my word. They just call him Fred Krueger. When do they start calling him Freddy? Everyone calls him Freddy.
Well, and that's a weird thing, because it's called like Freddy's Revenge in the title, so it's clearly right there. So...
I don't think I heard them call him Freddy once.
No, it was just
well, I guess in the song. I mean, they call him Freddy in the song.
Yeah,
that song, but they only use that song once too. So.
But I feel like overall, Robert Englund is just Freddy. Yeah. Although I don't feel like he was allowed to have as much fun as he was the first film.
And that's one of my big criticisms of Freddy in this film. First film, he's really fucking goofy, but it makes sense because it's like in a dream. Like, yeah, he does like the big long arm stretch and all this stuff. Like, there wasn't really... He did a lot of fantastical things in this one, but it just seemed like pretty cookie cutter villain shit. And he was like, oh, things are getting hot, which I did like that theme that it's like the boiler room and that's where he melted and everything. But like, you know, he just does the like teleport behind you kid stuff and crawl out of it. You know, it was like typical horror movie stuff, but it wasn't like what I would originally associate with Freddy Krueger, which is like, yeah, the weird dream proportions and doing weird things that you can only do in dreams. It was just like, he's doing bad guy shit, and it's like, that's fine, but that's not Freddy. You know? Yeah,
and it's kind of weird seeing this film, because I guess like Freddy in the film was supposed to be a bigger representation of like possessing him, which again is supposed to like symbolize his struggles with
like
his identity.
Crazy.
Yeah, with his like identity and everything. And so I guess like Freddy wanted to like really I say Freddy, Robert Englund wanted to really play up the innuendos to where like he wanted to stick razor blades in his mouth there, but I guess the actor who played Jesse was like, no, I'm not comfortable with that. You know, just like make it too on the nose. And but I think it's interesting the dynamic he plays, and there's definitely some cool stuff, I guess, like visually that you see with Freddy, but it's definitely like comparing it to like his first one, it's just not the same. It's like, you know, the grade value Freddy, I feel like. And that's the interesting thing also, because they changed the design of him to make him look more like a burn victim as opposed to like this unnatural sort of appearance there, because like he's definitely like more Vaselined up there, you know, just kind of like looks slick as opposed to like the dried, weird, bizarre stretching skin that he has in the first one. So that was like another thing that's like, okay, I mean, it's Freddy. I know it's Freddy, but it just doesn't feel like Freddy.
Yeah.
And so I feel like that's a definite big criticism of the film as well, that I feel like, you know, with these slasher films, you're watching it because of the slasher. You're not watching it because I'm like, oh, I really want to see this survivor here. No. You're watching it because you love the movie monster, and I just feel like comparing his performance in this one to the first one, I just feel like it's very,
Yeah,
you know.
I agree with that. And I feel like there's only one big slasher moment. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
When I think slashers, I think like kills, and they're doing like, oh yeah, remember when Jason killed this person this way, and that was cool. There's really only like one of those moments.
Yeah, and that's the kind of the weird thing. Like, really, if you count the bodies in this film, it's very few of them.
Yeah, and a lot of them are just like Freddy just walks up and slashes someone and then like moves on. Like,
yeah,
it's like, okay.
No, that's definitely the case with this film. Trying to think about other elements. I mean, I feel like there's not too much else about the film that sticks out, except for the random moments that happen, which I know we could talk more about as spoilers. Yeah. But that's definitely the stuff that like sticks in my brain after watching this movie. And yeah, I mean, there's nothing too crazy. Like I said, I feel like it had a very strong beginning. You know, I say strong, it's like pretty good beginning.
Yeah.
And then it gets to a point where there's a couple of bumps in the road, a couple potholes and stuff. And then it just starts like the bus going off the rails and just slamming into trees and dirt stirring up everywhere. And then all of a sudden, before you know it, you're like at a dead stop and you're like, okay.
Yeah.
I feel like that's the whole experience of the film, which is, it makes it very conflicting for me to see how I feel about it, because the film doesn't like make me like annoyed or aggravated. It's just more kind of like
it's almost like, and even a lot of the crazy stuff is not even like, like I feel like they were doing some crazy stuff and they expected the audience to be like, oh man, that was crazy, but the audience is just like, like I just like so desensitized to what's going on. It's like when you're watching the new Marvel movies and they're like, this is gonna be epic moment number 78, they're gonna cream their pants, and really the audience is just like what? Why'd you do that?
Just disillusioned execs.
It's like the end of, it's like Star Wars Episode 9.
Dang it, here we go again.
Just when like Palpatine does like the bass boost, and they're I feel like their fucking Disney boardroom full of exclusively 50-year-old white men were like, oh man, they're gonna love this. We're gonna make a big bass boot, and he's gonna like shoot lightning in the whole sky, and Rey Skywalker's gonna like slash through all of them with their light. And meanwhile, they're like, that should be epic, right? We're just gonna make it more epic than ever. And people are just sitting in the audience like, wow, I want to go home, dude. This is just boring. I'm just getting a seizure right now. That's kind of, obviously not to that scale, but that's kind of how I felt about like the whole party scene. I was just like, wow, there's no sense of conflict here, because I don't care if any of these people live or die,
It's just so weird. It's definitely just a weird dynamic, especially because in the first film, he's tracking down people one by one, and that's kind of the fear about it. Is like,
there's suspense. I feel like they did a really poor job of actually building any suspense in this movie. The one thing I will say that was suspenseful is like whether or not he was going to kill his sister.
Yeah, that was pretty nerve-wracking. Right. It was pretty disturbing.
Other than that, I don't think there was a whole lot of suspense for me personally.
No, there wasn't for me either. And so, watching this film again, I will say it was better for me the second time round, but I'm not sure if it's just because I knew what to expect, or just the fact that I heard your like giggles, and I'm just like, yeah, that is funny, huh?
Yeah, that is kind of funny.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, there's really, unfortunately, nothing else to really talk about this film that's like, oh yeah, I gotta praise this, praise that, because it's just like, music's fine. I feel like the effects are decent.
Decent.
Yeah, decent. I would probably say that. I don't feel like it's quite as polished as some of the effects in the first film, but it's like, it's fine. I mean, there's one scene that I really liked the idea and the way they went about the effects, and besides that, it's pretty like, okay. But the rest of the effects are definitely ranging on the bizarre and hard to comprehend. Was there anything you wanted to talk about before spoiling this movie?
Man, I'm ready to spoil it.
All right, well, that's good, bud. That's good. But before we do that, how about we let the good folks at home and all about. How about you tell us, what do you rate A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, Freddy's Revenge?
Well, here's my Nightmare on Elm Street part review, Freddy's Revenge. Well, you know, I think the movie did some stuff a little more clean than the first movie, but ultimately it was just not really any more creative. Kind of followed almost the same plot, but without any of the things that made the first one special, and added some airs of confusion. Overall, though, I felt like, you know, it was a fine movie. It was a decent cinematic experience. There was just a little confusion. There were a couple funny editing parts here and there. There was some bad acting here and there. Overall, it wasn't the worst. I hated the way it ended.
Mm-hmm.
We could talk about that later.
For sure.
But I still like the realm of Elm Street. I like Freddy Krueger. You can't do too much wrong with that, and I feel like they didn't butcher it by any means. It was a decent movie, and it had some funny moments and some likable characters. I'm gonna give it a 5. This is a 5 for me.
That's pretty impressive. Pretty impressive. You're able to go split down the middle there.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's definitely good that you could at least enjoy the moments that aren't great and are kind of goofy there.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely is good. For me, I really struggled the second time through trying to figure out where exactly I would put it on the rating scale, especially comparing the movies we've seen previous.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I could be generous enough to give it a 5, but again, it just comes from the fact that the first film, but I'm not quite as, crazy about the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise as you are, if comparing size. However, I will say, there is still stuff to like about this film, and I do like the unique things it does. I mean, like I said, it does stand out in my mind after watching it. It's not like one of those things that I'm like, okay, I couldn't tell you what happened. There's definitely a lot of weird moments that stick out. And, it does sometimes add to its benefit, but then also it's kind of a strike against it.
Mm-hmm.
I like this sequel better than Hellbound, Hellraiser 2. Because that film, the decisions they make just made me just mad. And it's bad if a movie starts making me mad.
Yeah.
That's where it starts to get down low. But just like Hellraiser 2, I feel like A Nightmare on Elm Street 2 has some benefits as well that does make it enjoyable. Like I said, I love the colors they use in the film for lighting certain scenes. I feel like it's visually interesting. I feel like, again, it's a good group of characters there. Not amazing or so memorable, but good. Just hits a mark, passable, average stuff. For me, if I had to rate it, it would be either a generous 4 or 3.5. Because it's above Hellraiser 2, just not a whole lot. This is not a film, to be perfectly honest, I'm going to run back and watch really anytime soon. I'm more likely to watch Friday the 13th Part 2 more than I am this film. But as is, like I said, I feel like it's definitely not pure trash, because I have definitely seen films that have hit that mark, but definitely isn't anywhere near what the first film set as the standard. But yeah, so I think overall, obviously, if you like the first film, I still think this one's worth checking out, even if you end up not liking it. It's worth watching at least once. But with that said, let's talk about some spoilers, shall we, ladies and germs?
Ladies and germs?
So, we've definitely danced around a lot of stuff. Any particular bit you want to chomp at first?
Yeah. I want to tackle the ending right away, right? If you guys remember, Nightmare on Elm Street, the first, ends in the stupidest way possible, where they defeat Freddy, it's closure. And then for some reason they just have that shot of them in the back of the car, and Freddy just pops out and he's like, he's back, and they don't explain it, and it's just whatever. This movie, they're just like, oh hey, 5 years ago some girl went crazy, which is also weird to me that they would don't Like, they acknowledge that this happened, that somebody got murdered, and that, you know, because, like, several people in that town get murdered. They don't acknowledge that any of them got murdered except for the guy across the street from the girl.
Yeah, Glenn.
Yeah. And they're just like, whatever. Like, you think in a small town, people would, like, be talking about that still 5 years later, but people seem to just like, whatever.
Yeah.
Whatever, man.
It's old news.
You snooze, you lose. You know, and then this exact same thing starts happening again, and, like, they're like, oh, yeah, the whole weird, all the moms remember Freddy Krueger, and we silently, like, that whole plot point of the first movie, they just tossed it out. Anyway, that aside, yeah, the ending of this movie, despite the first one being, like, objectively shit, they decided to do the same thing. They went through the entire plot, they beat Freddy Krueger in the same way that the first one did, except for this time they had a shortcut. They didn't even have to do any character realization. Just Lisa read Nancy's diary and was like, oh, Nancy said this is how you kill him, so we're just not going to be afraid of him anymore. And then they're just not afraid of him anymore, and they kill him, and it's great. And then there's just a scene that's like obviously a dream, I guess. I don't know. I would hope it is. And then they're on the bus, and he's like, you're going too fast. And they're like, yeah, shut the fuck up. We're just all going to forget about that thing. This is why it must be a dream, because they were like, we're all just going to forget about that thing that happened. And they're like, okay, we're not going to talk about it ever again. The fact that you went crazy and killed 3 people, and now we're just going back to high school. So it must be a dream. But then they just ended the same way, where they're like, it's all resolved, but then Freddy's back, and the terrible cut between him popping out of the seat where they didn't edit it well. It wasn't even surprising or anything, because you could tell it was just like a whole different time of day they filmed it. It's just, and then the glove comes out. Like, it's just, yeah, it's like, why would you, the same fucking thing. We're in a vehicle, and then Freddy's back after the resolution. So you just picked the same ending.
Yeah, it's definitely a pretty weak ending, which I understand they wanted to hint at, like, oh, you know, Freddy's not dead, he's still around, but I feel like if you're going to have that ending again,
yeah,
I feel like you need to have less of random crazy stuff happening in actuality. I think the ending, while it wouldn't have been amazing, like more amazing by doing this, I think at the very least, if you had set up the ground rules of, like, you know, oh, like, only crazy stuff happens in dreams, there it can't happen in reality, but then it leaves this jarring thing, like, okay, are they actually sleeping? Were they awake? Like,
well, yeah, I 100% agree with you there, but because they didn't actually set hard rules or, like, really hard, you know, understanding of when you're in a dream or not or anything, I feel like you have to establish that first before you can start bending it. Otherwise, it's just confusing throughout.
Yeah, and I think that was, like, my biggest issue, is just the fact that I'm like, you know, again, you would think it would be, like, more compelling to be like, oh, you know, since stuff can happen in dreams and reality, right, you know, you don't know which is which, and it's just like, well, yeah, but I feel like that takes away the suspense, because you're like, okay, so no matter what I do, because that's the thing that bothers me, is the fact that Jesse goes through the motions of not trying to go to sleep, but we don't know really if he goes to sleep, is that whenever he's possessed, because we've seen him just randomly be possessed for no reason whatsoever. Like, sometimes he'll do it whenever he's asleep, sometimes it happens while he's awake,
right? Like, when he's at the Lisa's house or whatever, he's like, oh no, he's coming, you know, like,
yeah. And so because of that, I feel like it's just the rules are not concrete, and so whenever you see him, you know, taking the stay up all night pills and drinking coffee,
which is just the same shit they borrowed from the first movie,
exactly. And so I feel like that's the only reason why they're like, well, they did it in the first movie, they would do it in this movie. It's like, you haven't really established that, oh, if you go to sleep, I will be possessed.
Right. Not to mention, like, Nancy, to her credit, like, sought help in whatever way she could until she realized she had to do this on her own, and then she was, like, staying awake and all this stuff.
Yeah, because...
Versus, this guy is just like, no, nothing's wrong with me, I'm okay, and, like, but now I'm gonna stay away, and it's just like, bro, you're killing people.
Yeah, like, you would... Yeah, because if he truly believed that he was killing people, such as Coach Snyder, as we later find out, you would think he's just like, okay, like, no, I'm done, I need to get help. But no, he just continues doing the same thing. Because, like, if I felt like, if I had a dream that I murdered somebody, and then I learned that person died the exact same way I would be highly concerned and try to seek help any which way, but Jesse just kind of shrugs it off, and he's just like, yeah, I don't know. And that's why, you know, I feel like Lisa kind of becomes more of the driving force again. Like, she's great value Nancy, you know, coming in. Because that's like kind of how Glenn was in the first film, kind of pretty useless overall for the most part, and didn't listen. So I feel like it's almost like we're getting a Nightmare on Elm Street from great value Glenn.
yeah, Glenn's perspective, yeah.
So I think that's the thing that just really irks me about it, is just, again, like, you know, again, which leads to like an ending that you're like, oh my god, you know, because like the bus scene I wasn't crazy about in the first part of the movie. Like I thought it was fine, but then just reintroducing it again, I was just like, cheesy beyond all get out, which is funny because I don't know, I couldn't recognize it in the second shot, but the first shot, the bus driver is Robert Englund, just without makeup and on. Yeah, it was just him just doing that. So I think that's kind of nifty to do that. But then, again, just rehashing the beginning at the end, it does feel pretty cheap. And it's goofy as all hell, because it's not even, like, threatening at all.
No.
Like, because it's just, like, the bus bouncing up and down in the desert and Freddy going... You know, just laughing, and it's not scary, it's just goofy.
Which I thought it worked fine as the first shot. Yeah, as like, and then he wakes up from this nightmare or whatever, and he's like, oh, and that's when the nightmares start. Yeah, I feel like they should start kind of goofy and then like get scarier, or you know. But I don't know. Yeah, them doing it again was dumb.
No, it really was, and I feel like a lot of our complaints is going to come from like all of the crazy stuff that happens. Like, for instance, we talked about the parakeet. Yeah. Which is such a weird thing that I just don't understand their thought process behind.
I guess I get, like, he's getting closer to reality, I guess, is like what those scenes signify, like the things that are happening to them, the whole reason the house is hot to begin with and all that stuff is like, and it keeps getting hotter through the movie. I liked that device, but yeah, the random, like, the parakeet exploding and stuff was like, okay, like, really?
Yeah, and the parakeet just like going berserk and attacking everybody there, and then just combusting in flames.
Yeah.
And the dad's pure instinct is, here, help me check this gas leak here. Yeah. It's like, oh, you did it. Cherry bomb, wasn't it?
Cherry bomb.
Yeah, and it just makes no sense on like just how that would ever happen. You know, because how could a bird fly around?
Right. I kind of got the dad bit though, because he was like pretty clueless throughout the whole movie.
That's true.
And then the mom, I mean, that's the reason they moved into this house to begin with, even though he was like, was informed that the mom killed herself in the middle of the room and the daughter went crazy, and he's like, and he didn't tell anybody in his family that, how do you think we got this great deal, hon?
Yeah, that's definitely a dad move, I would probably say, just being like,
I could fix this AC, you just need some Freon, you know? He was just a fucking doofus.
Yeah.
And then his kid comes back butt naked in the middle of the night with blood on him or whatever, and he's just like, you've been doing drugs, haven't you?
Oh, that was so weird. But yeah, that's another weird scene. It's just the fact that and maybe you can explain this to me, Aaron.
Okay.
But why does Jesse all of a sudden be like, I'm having the worst dreams, I'm going to go to a bar, and not only just a bar, a gay bar.
Well, that was why I thought it was a dream. You know what I mean?
Yes, because it doesn't make sense.
That's the only way it makes sense, is if he has a dream, and in this dream he walks down the street and suddenly there's a gay bar there, because why is there a gay bar within walking distance of his neighborhood, you know? And then he walks in and orders a beer, and the guy just gives it to him, you know, and he never pays for it. And then he finds his coach there in full leather daddy outfit. Yeah. All of that points to me that it's a dream, right? But then somewhere it just stops becoming... And then, you know, the coach makes him run laps in the gym, and tells him to hit the showers. Like, all of that seemed very dream-like. But then you stop seeing things from Jesse's point of view, and you start seeing it just from the coach's point of view, and the coach is getting terrorized by it.
Yeah.
And, like, that's not dream... like vision, which is weird. And then so you start seeing things only through the POV of or like, you know, through the POV of, like, I guess Freddy, but he had not yet been transformed into Freddy, because this was the first time he gets transformed into Freddy, and they make a very clear visual distinction. He only transforms into Freddy whenever the coach is already dragged in the showers, and there's like steam, and then he comes out and he's Freddy, and he like slices him up, and then he transforms back, you know? So like, it's just weird that it was like, okay, well, that wasn't a dream then, or was it?
Exactly. It's like so bizarre stuff that, again, if this was a dream, you're like, yeah, I buy it. It's a dream and stuff. But just, it's so bizarre too. Like I said, I have never seen a horror character get attacked by so many balls in my life. Just ball assault.
That was, I mean, that whole thing was just like blatant homosexuality.
Absolutely. Just being slapped in the face by balls.
And then he gets tied up by the ropes and like stripped naked in the showers.
It was just the cleanest rip of his clothes. Just
you know, and then he's even like moaning while he's getting slashed. It seemed like some Hellraiser shit, you know what I mean? Because it's like the pain and the pleasure.
Yeah, for sure. And it just, oh my god, it just killed me seeing like the towels like floating in.
And the towel,
and just
and then they
whipping.
whip him on. He gets whipped on the ass over and over, and I was like, okay, like I thought that whole scene was funny. It was good. I thought that was, you know, I would have enjoyed that so much more if they had just made it make sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like
you can keep all the fun elements, the balls, the towels, everything. Just like give me a clear line of like when he wakes up.
Just make it like a wet dream. You know what I mean?
Because there's no way that happened for real in a movie that takes itself as seriously as this movie does. Where you go to a gay bar and you find your coach, and the coach's response is to drag you back to a school in the middle of the night, make you run laps and hit the showers while he's still in his leather daddy outfit in the 80s. Like, there's just none, like, no.
Yeah, that just doesn't happen.
That makes a lot of sense in the context of Jesse's head. But then for that to, because then Coach Snyder does die, and he dies there and in the showers, butt naked, you know. So like, okay, does that just give Jesse the terrifying, like, reality bending powers where he could have made his coach be there and then made his coach be in the shadow? You know, like does he control other people's actions too? Because that's the only way that makes sense outside of the context of a dream.
Yeah, it's just so bizarre just seeing that. And again, that's one of the parts of the movie the first time I'm watching, I'm like, what am I watching? Yeah. You know, because again, coming from the first one, I'm sure you were not expecting this scene whatsoever in any context.
No. I mean, I was expecting a lot more female sexualization. I'm glad with what we got. I thought that was funny. I'm all for it. I even thought it's funny. The very first fucking time I feel like anybody gets blatantly sexualized at all is whenever, well, first off, he wakes up super sweaty in his underwear.
Oh my god.
After screaming in the middle of the night. That's the first, like...
You know, adjust his junk.
Yeah, he's got to control his balls before he gets up. But that's not, like, blatant sexualization. The blatant sexualization comes whenever, like, from the other characters in the movie. Was, like, whenever he gets his pants pulled down, and Lisa's friend is like, nice ass. And then she's like, right before that, she was like, you riding him yet? Or something, like some sort of like, he's like, you guys fucking every night? And I was like, okay. And then later, of course, Grady asks him, he's like, you mounting that daily? And I was like, at least both sides are sexualizing each other. That's equality. That's cool. I'm down with that. I'll give it all that.
Oh, another moment of like blatant over sexualization is whenever Jesse has to clean his room and he has that dance.
He dances, he's got like a little pop gun. And he like has it on his junk, and then the door opens and it's Lisa and his mom, and he just busts all over them.
Yeah.
Just pops a little cork, and he's like, oh, oops.
Yeah, the first time I saw it's even worse the second time around because you know it's coming. It's just like, and he has like the thrust as it pops there, which apparently that whole dance in the movie, the actor who plays Jesse not only dislikes this film, but just really dislikes that dance. And he was like, yeah, I was forced to do that. And then other people have said like, oh no, that was all him. Yeah, like, so it's such a weird thing. Although like, with people like kind of understanding it, he's kind of grown on it a bit, like has a little bit of appreciation. But yeah, that was a whole other thing again that I'm just like, what in the world is going on? just adds more to the chaos of this film.
He's just being a goofy guy.
Yeah.
I got it, but like I don't know that it necessarily needed to be in this film. But it was fine.
Yeah, no, it was fine. It was a moment of brevity. Oh, another sign is the fact that the sign on its door said "No chicks."
Yeah, you know, it said like
Yeah,
no
like,
chicks from out of town or something.
yeah, and it was supposed to be like no checks from out of town,
Uh-huh.
but he changed the E to I.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
wonder if I watch this whole movie again, if it has like a secondary like underlying plot of him rejecting Lisa. You know, because he does. It's like if the whole symbolism of the movie is embracing gayness. And he's scared of his gayness or something. Is that really? Because maybe that's it. Because all these weird, latently gay dreams, and then he goes to kiss Lisa, and he's like gonna go down on her, and that's when Freddy comes, and his response is, "I gotta abandon Lisa and go see Grady now in his bedroom."
I know.
Who's like in his fucking little tighty whities.
Yeah.
And then he gets locked in the room with him, you know, and he penetrates him, you know.
You know, it's funny because you are right on the money about that. That's the exact same like messages people have gotten from this film. Yes, because the fact is like, okay, he's not depending on Lisa for help. He's depending on Grady for help, like a more masculine figure as opposed to a feminine
Who
figure.
are constantly naked together or sweating or whatever because they're like in the showers together or in the locker room together. Yeah,
like doing push-ups together,
Right.
sweating all the time.
yeah. They're the real enemies to lovers arc in this movie.
Yeah, and so it's just so bizarre seeing like scenes like that, and we could definitely talk about the pool party because I feel like we've talked about that the most.
Yeah,
It
I
is
guess we
just
have to.
it's. I mean, here, you know what? I'll hold off on the pool party because I have one bullet point I want to bring up, which
Sure,
I'm not sure
sure.
how to feel, because. While cleaning up his room, because Lisa's helping Jesse out, they find Nancy's diary left there. And I feel like for it being the diary of Nancy, it wasn't super helpful. I feel like it was very vague bullet points like, oh, I'm having dreams about Fred Krueger, you know, crazy stuff. And then I feel like they have a moment whenever they're over at Lisa's house where it's just like, I've been reading a diary, it's all true, you know, because she's been linking it to real life events because she takes him to the boiler room that Freddy worked at. And then, like, she reads this passage as if this is, like, the huge reveal, and really, I don't feel like it has that punch behind it.
Yeah.
It's just saying, like, no. And so, like, she's making jumps in conclusions. So, unless, like, Nancy specifically wrote down, Freddy has been able to possess people somehow, or, you know, reason exposition. But I feel like we never get that from the diary. I feel like that should have been a bigger player in the narrative of the story. But
it also just feels a little cheap because it never comes into play until it needs to.
exactly. Yeah. So I feel like that's definitely just another thing that I'm like, you could have made that so much stronger, but it's fairly weak by comparison.
Yeah.
There, but that was one bullet point I just wanted to bring up, that I feel like it's so weird that it should be a bigger thing, like, oh, this is from the sole survivor of the Nightmare on Elm Street killings,
Right.
But it's really not. It just kind of just confirms, like, oh yeah, you know, someone else knows about him.
Right.
But yeah, let's talk about that grand old pool party at Lisa's house.
That's where like the rules were getting bent before and confused and muddled, and this one is just like the ultimate culmination of like, we want to do this, so we're gonna do it, and we don't care how it makes sense in the universe. Like, so just, you know, he's real now and in the world, and everybody, but he still has these fantastical powers. Freddy does, because he comes to life while fucking Jesse's still awake. He's just like, he's coming while he's with Lisa, and then he arrives and then tries to kill Lisa, and Lisa convinces him not to, and he decides to just like disappear out the window only to burrow up from the floor of the pool. And like, meanwhile people are like, I kind of dig the phenomena that happens, the supernatural phenomena almost.
Exploding weenies.
The exploding weenies is funny. The boiling pool, you know, it all has to do with like the boiler room, the fire. I mean, they kept that theme pretty consistent throughout, and that was cool. But yeah, just how does all of that happen and then it not be like, all right, everybody in town knows that this, like they just
yeah, like nobody could just be like, well, that was weird. Let's continue on with our normal lives.
Keep walking on forward,
Yeah, it's so weird, and again, like. It's such a weird sequence of events even before they arrive at the pool, whenever like Freddy has possessed Jesse and is going after Lisa. And I feel like, it's a pretty okay reveal, although it feels a little more lackluster after the like huge like entrance that happened whenever Freddy possesses Jesse in Grady's room. There's like the whole like he's like basically the metal fingertips are like shooting out of his fingertips there, and then like his skin is like ripping, falling apart there, and then you look inside Jesse's mouth screaming and you see like an eye looking back, and then you feel like the face pressing forward there and just cuts himself out
through,
and as opposed to like whenever he's at Lisa's house, I mean, I'm sure they don't want to go through the whole process again, but it's just like it's happening again,
and
it's just like,
and then the camera looks away and then he's behind the desk and it's just like
and I feel like just Freddy, like, again, possessing Jesse, if he has these fantastical powers, he didn't really act like he had that much power. He was just kind of just running and slashing,
right?
Kind of like Ghostface, which again, I feel like it's not a problem. It's still scary having a guy with like finger knives chase after you, but whenever you've seen the true power he can do and has done, it just kind of makes it a little more lackluster, because again, I think Lisa beats him up pretty good, like is able to kick him in the face there.
She like, hits him with a lamp, and
and then there's like a whole like toying thing where it's like, is Jesse actually conscious, which I guess he is, and then Lisa speaks to Jesse, and that just makes Freddy want to retreat for whatever reason, disappears, and then people are like, what just happened? What's going on? And then whenever he pops up at the pool, that's when real carnage begins. He's like slashing like random individuals. People are flying into the pool, like getting knocked out of the way and flying into the pool. There's even one dude that dies getting trampled. Like he's like,
they're all trying to get over the fence, and they trample him to death.
Yeah, it's like such a weird sequence of events. And then they even have like the one dude's like, hey, it's okay, man. It's okay.
Just tell us what you want.
Yeah, and then he just gets whacked by the side. And then Lisa's dad comes running out with a shotgun, just
completely misses.
Yeah, and they're like, no, you'll kill him. And so then I guess because Jesse sees Lisa, he's like, okay, I'm leaving now.
And he just
walks
through the fence.
Walks through the fence.
With a blaze of fire. Yeah, he does shit like that, and he like burrows up through the ground and like catches wieners on fire. But yeah, the only way he can kill people is just stabbing them with his little fingy knives. Like, come on.
No, it's so weird. And then whenever it comes to how Lisa defeats Freddy is also very weird, because she has like zero context except like, oh, he's still there, I can call out to him, I'll go to the boiler room plant.
Yeah, I don't know, it just seemed that's where like I feel like you can chart the plot points A, B, C, like easy. This is like, I knew that was how it was gonna end. She's like, he's still in there, and I just have to not be afraid of him. And they even did the fucking she kissed him for some reason.
Yeah,
while
while Jesse's Freddy.
Right.
Yeah, and just doing that. And
like,
then,
okay.
And then all of a sudden the boiler room corrupts into flames, burns Freddy.
Yeah.
And then Jesse emerges from the charcoal husk of Freddy. It's just so weird. And speaking of weird, it's just also weird that there's also weird creatures at the boiler plant, like the dogs with baby faces.
Yeah.
There, and then there's like the rat that looks like a demon that's attacked by a cat who also looks like a demon. It's just so bizarre. And then even Lisa has moments of like, she thinks there's like maggots in her wound and ants, and then she feels like she's falling, but nope, it was just in her head. Because
I actually liked that as a device, because she's realizing that like, okay, these are kind of illusions, you know what I mean, that Freddy has some sort of illusory effect over the world. What happens isn't real. You just have to not believe in it. You have to not be scared of it, and you can beat him or whatever. But he's trying to scare you because he gets fueled by his fear or whatever. Like, that's the one thing that did kind of, like, tie it in and make a lot of the things that don't make sense make sense. But I still think it's fucking cheap overall.
No, definitely cheap. And so I feel like just the whole film kind of ends up, because by that point I was just like, oh, I'm ready for this movie to be done. Again, it wasn't grueling, but it was just like, okay, I think I'm done.
I was kind of with you there, and which was disappointing because I feel like that could have been a cooler scene had we not already arrived, had we not already been numbed by the movie, you know. But because, like, that's the descent into hell, that's the hero's journey, you know what I mean? Like, we're gonna go to the lair of the beast and slay him. That's supposed to be the big climactic moment, but it just sort of felt like, all right, like, okay. You don't even really like Lisa that much by that point. You're just like, okay. You don't really like the main character that much by that point. You're like, okay, let's just get this over with, you know.
Yeah, it just makes it for a very rough film. Was there any other issues you had with the pool party that you're really just like, man, I hate that scene?
It's just like they're obviously doing this to bait more sequels out. That's why they do the shitty ending. That's why there's probably a million of these movies. Why even do the pool party scene if, like, how are you gonna explain that in the next one?
Yeah, they'll just forget about it.
Well,
Yeah, it's all over.
That was a dream, you know.
Yeah. Without spoiling anything, I can confirm in the third one they do not talk about the pool whatsoever.
I figured they would. Yeah. Hey, remember that time that, like, 8 people died from a masked dude in a sweater that was slicing people up and fucking exploding wieners and making the pool boil over? No, I don't remember that either. Hey, have you seen Fred? No, I think he died in a car accident. Oh.
They just keep forgetting.
Oh, well, who cares?
They just always forget about Freddy Krueger. Oh my god. Man. Aside from all that fun pool partying, was there any other points you felt like you wanted to hit about the film or anything like that?
No, I mean, that was I think we talked about most things.
Yeah, I feel like I've done the same. Like, I've said my piece, you know, stuff I love about the film, stuff I really don't like about the film. And overall, it's just, okay. You know, I feel like that's just my overall thoughts. Again, definitely better than some films I've seen, but definitely not top echelon whenever it comes to the world of horror. But
no, this isn't really going to be on my list anywhere. If somebody's like, hey, you watch any good horror movies lately?
Yeah.
I wouldn't be like, oh yeah, Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, you know? I would sooner be like, you know, let's go watch one of the other ones that we watched that was cool. Like, I'm not really going to be recommending this to my friends.
Yeah, but still, it's pretty impressive that you still liked and enjoyed the film.
I honestly thought, like, as much as we're talking shit on it, it's like a decently well-constructed film. It's just got some plot holes. It's got some acting issues. You know, it's not that creative, but it's not a badly made film.
Yeah, I think that's a totally fair assessment there, and so I'm glad that there's still stuff to be enjoyed about this film years later, but it is kind of still pretty bad that there's a lot of stuff that will forever be permeated in my skull.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think that'll probably put an end to this episode talking about this film. So how's about we talk about the next film I have planned for ya,
Yes.
Aaron?
Inject that information directly into my
Injecting
mind.
information. So this is actually kind of interesting because this film we have actually seen a trailer for in some of the films we've watched on DVD. And it was a very interesting film where it's in a place that's very dark, and the deeper you go, the darker it gets.
Oh,
And
is it about that cave one?
Uh-huh.
Where you keep going in the cave?
Yeah.
I forget what it's called.
Yep. It's so
Caves.
Yeah, close. You're right on the money. You are so close to it. It's something that you do whenever you're going deeper into The cave.
Descend.
Yes.
Is that the name of
Yeah,
it?
The
Okay.
Descent.
The Descent.
Yep, so that'll be next for our episode coming up. So thank you all so much for listening to this episode. And we'll see you all again next time when we're popping the scary with The Descent.
You should have said, we're diving into The Descent.
Oh man, we're diving straight in, boys! Woo! Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube, Castbox, or iTunes platforms to stay up to date when new episodes drop. To see what Aaron and I are up to, check out our respective Twitter accounts. For me, it is @ColeKirkVA, and for Aaron, it is @AnimalGameDev. Thank you all so much for listening to our podcast. We'll speak to you all again next time when we're popping the scary.